Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. He grew up in a religious home, and his grandfather had been a minister, and so was his father, and he would later take on that role as well. His parents tried to shield him from the racism that was around them, but they could only do so much. His father fought against racial prejudice. He suffered from it and believed that racism and segregation weren't a part of God's will for his people. His father's views on everyone being created equally and that no one person or group had superiority stuck with Dr. King. He became a pastor to a church in Montgomery, Alabama. His belief was in Jesus' commandment of loving your neighbor as yourself. He even mentioned that before he became a civil rights leader, he was a preacher of the gospel and it was his highest commitment. He didn't first become an activist until the Montgomery bus boycott, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white man. This bus boycott in turn showed that black businesses was essential to making the city run, but it didn't have a lasting change on the civil rights movement. It was only the beginning of the civil rights movement and another part of his ministry. The SCLC, which stands for Southern Christian Leadership Conference, is an organization and can be traced all the way back to the Montgomery bus boycott. Dr. King served as its first president. It was one of the most dramatic and massive nonviolent protests. It was also a signal to Black America and would be later known as the Civil Rights Movement had begun. With its founding in 1957, they adopted a nonviolence point of view. They worked with local organizations across the South and determined it should be open to all people, regardless of their background. It was an organization that was there to help people with their civil and political rights. Their wants and goals were for white Americans to not stand by and watch wrongs be committed against the blacks. They hoped to encourage Black Americans to seek justice and reject all injustice, and they needed anyone associated with the SCLC to adopt a philosophy of nonviolence. While in a Birmingham, Alabama jail, Dr. King wrote Letter from Birmingham Jail. It was a response to local clergymen who called his actions of his protest for segregation unwise and untimely. The clergymen were against desegregation, so while in jail, Dr. King wrote his response to them in the columns of the newspaper which he had seen the article. This letter was a response to public concern and caution caused by the white clergymen. He argued for his people to be nonviolent resistors. He argued that his fellow resistors had a duty to fight injustice. He explained to them the steps of a nonviolent protest, which were fact-finding, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. He knew he needed to take public action and be a demonstration for his people. This was the first time he had broken the unjust law.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech was about him wanting equal rights for blacks and whites, because in the Declaration of Independence he said that they were signed a promising note that all men were created equally, but they had failed to adhere to it. Even though they weren't satisfied with what had been done up until that point, he told them that they had to remain steadfast on their journey and to not turn back and to refrain from violence. He hoped that one day whites and blacks could sit down together and form a brotherhood to better lead these United States. He longed for the day where his children wouldn't be judged based off of their skin color, but what the contents of their knowledge held. He ended up getting his wish in 1954 when, in Brown v. Board of Education, the Supreme Court ruled the separate but equal clause was a flawed standard. On the third Monday in January, we celebrate his legacy and life and how he brought hope and healing to America. It celebrates an influential American civil rights leader who is most well known for his campaigns to end racial segregation on public transport and for racial equality in America. It celebrates the global vision of the World House and a nation who triumphed over poverty, racism, war, and violence. On his holiday, people learn about the power of unconditional love, even for one's adversaries, as a way to fight injustices and diffuse violent disputes. I leave you with one of my favorite quotes by Dr. King. Faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the full staircase. And he took that first step and never looked back.